Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Backlot Banter. My name is Tucker Hazel. Today, I am joined by my sedentary co-host, Tanner Dykstra, and today we're here to talk about the new Robert Zemeckis, Robin Wright, Tom Hanks movie, Here. We saw it in theaters, and we're here to talk about it, but, you get it? We're here to talk about it.
Mm.
If you want to talk to us about this film, you can join our Discord server, you can leave a comment in the comment section, you can subscribe to the channel, you can like it. All these things will contribute to our happiness and our long and fruitful lives. Tanner, you have seen Here.
Yes,
You
and
and
so have
I,
you, Tucker, but because
big.
I want you to tell me what you think first.
Oh, we're flipping the script today,
We have
ladies and
flipped the
gentlemen.
script on it, yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is an experimental episode, much like Here is a surprisingly experimental, modern, theatrically released
Never been
film.
done before, folks.
Never been done before. Here is it's my favorite movie of the year. I think this movie is remarkable. I think that it might not be the strongest in any one given category, but for me, the experience of watching Here and the ways in which it plays with filmmaking, and I just think has some of the strongest themes I've ever seen in a film. I adore this movie. I think it's phenomenal. I think it's remarkable, and I'm ready to champion it against the unwashed masses.
Yes.
Tanner, are you a member of the said masses?
Um, I will say that Here is not my favorite movie of the year. I think that, because I don't know, Here is really interesting because in the lead up to it, there was sort of like, hey, this movie is coming out. It's like a re-teaming from Forrest Gump.
Yeah.
Oh, and also Robert Zemeckis is using real-time AI de-aging technology, and that put
Mhm.
everyone on edge a little bit. Everyone
Yeah.
got a little prickly at that thought. Myself included, I was like, oh boy, Robert Zemeckis, he's always been this like pushing forward film technician, but his recent experiments in that department have not turned out super well. So
Yes.
the cards are not stacked in his favor necessarily. And then you come along and say it, and you say it's your favorite movie of the year. And there's a couple other people I follow on Twitter who are like, hey, this movie's really good actually. So I like right before I went to go see it, my expectations were raised a little bit, and I think it's good. I think Here is a good movie.
I'll take it.
It didn't like really speak to me or sing to
Sure.
me in a lot of ways like it may have you or some other folks, but also there are some people who I think are going into it with a little bit of vitriol that I think is unfair. I think it's
Yeah.
frankly unfair. Because I think it is really interesting. Of course,
Yes.
from the technical standpoints that we'll talk about, but also for me thematically as a sort of antidote almost to Forrest Gump, and I
Hmm.
want to get
Hmm.
into that as
Yeah.
well. Of
Interesting.
course, this is Zemeckis, Wright, Hanks, and even screenwriter Eric Roth coming
Yes.
back on this
Hmm.
project as
And
well.
Tanner, composer Alan Silvestri.
Oh, good point. Good point.
Yeah. Uh,
So where do we want to
anything?
start?
Anything? Let's talk about the fact that this movie's all set in one location, huh? I think that may
Oh,
be
okay.
a
Yeah.
interesting thing to mention that we haven't yet, because that is the core conceit of this film. It is adapted from a graphic novel also called Here, which I read earlier in the year, which I probably set my expectations properly
Sure.
going into this movie and watching the ways in which it parallels and diverges from the graphic novel. I think certainly probably heightened my experience with this film. But it's the ways in which the film plays with the concept of being set in one place
Yeah.
and then ties that in with a bunch of things that I think people can use as criticisms against this film because it is so non-traditional. But I think it strikes that balance really well. And you can say it's a gimmick, and I wouldn't disagree. But
Yeah.
sometimes I think a gimmick can be
Yeah, so
good.
gimmick is often used in this like negative way, but like honestly, I think that you can use it positively as well. Or maybe there's another word that you could use that
Yeah,
doesn't have the connotation of a gimmick being like cheap necessarily.
sure.
But yeah, I mean, frankly, for me, I assumed with this project that it would be told linearly,
Mhm.
and the complete out of sequence nature of this story is
Yeah.
really what drew me in. And I really didn't know that we'd be going like, I figured that because they showed in the trailer like the dinosaur part or
Yeah.
whatever. I figured that would be like 30 seconds at the beginning of the movie, and we would never return to like that part, and the rest of the film would be all Hanks, Wright, that
Yeah.
kind of storyline. But we do get quite a bit of sprinkling in there, like like this like 1880s storyline, or even
Mhm.
like this 1770s storyline, the
Mhm.
1920s, the 1940s, stuff like that. I think it's all really interesting to me, and like found those storylines quite compelling as well.
Yeah.
Same as what like the main story, that a majority of the time is still given to Tom Hanks and Robin Wright and Paul Bettany, and I don't know if I recognized any other faces amongst that
Kelly
crowd, if you want to pull up
Rose
the
is played
cast.
by Kelly something. I've seen her in something before.
Okay,
One
yeah.
second.
But like honestly, all those stories were quite grabbing to me. I think it points to
Kelly
Zemeckis's.
Riley. She was in Pride and Prejudice. She was in Haunting in Venice. She was
Oh,
in
okay.
Flight, which I guess is where she met good old Bobby Z.
Yeah. But like the screenwriting team of Zemeckis and Roth coming back on this one, I think they're just like obviously these are two incredibly talented screenwriters. Eric Roth
Yeah.
has written some of the most classic, American films of like the 1980s and 1990s. Uh, and he just knows how to like write a compelling family narrative, and he does it like three or four times here.
Yeah.
So yeah, I really liked the collage of
Yeah.
stories that are weaved through this, and sometimes literally displayed as a collage, which I did not
Yeah.
know would be a screen. The filmmaking technique of this film is the sort of fading in of squares and rectangles that display different time periods. I thought that was a really cool touch.
Yeah, let's talk about the editing first and foremost. Before I give my thoughts on
Sure.
the narrative and the writing and the characters, because I think it's the ways in which the nonlinear storytelling and the cross-cutting editing and the this movie is the ultimate example of the match cut. It is the
Yes. Well,
logical extreme
it
of the
has to
match
be.
cut,
Yeah.
and I think that is incredibly powerful. And the fact that they adapt a graphic novel that is about it's the exact same concept of
Mhm.
one camera location. Of course, it's a graphic novel,
Right.
but the parallel is there.
The perspective. Yeah.
One set perspective, and how that set perspective evolves over time and merges through overlaying cells of different time periods, and they basically one to one adapt that
Yeah.
into a feature film. And this is maybe it might be the most accurate adaptation I've ever
Sure.
seen in terms of people might point to certain moments of something like Into the Spider Verse that has these moments of comic book things showing up, but cells and frames of graphic novels and comic storytelling are something that you very rarely see
Yeah.
adapted into
I mean,
film.
that is the gimmick,
Yeah,
that's
sure.
thrown in sometimes. Like, the one I always think of is like Ang Lee's Hulk, for example,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There are
which uses
moments.
like the
Yeah.
comic panel thing to like swap between scenes, and you're like, okay, it's kind of cute, I guess.
hmm
But that's
But
as
it's
far as it
not
goes.
tonally meaningful in
Right.
most films. It's aesthetically interesting, but I think it ends up doing both here, where it's both aesthetically interesting in the ways in which uh, sections of the frame will be parted off into white squares that will
Mhm.
then fade and match to other time periods, and so you get a sense of how things have evolved over time, whether that is between someone growing up or a scene transition changing because a little bit of time has passed, or paralleling entire time periods, which is tonally and thematically where I think things get tied together really well. Is that we're able to get a sense of the world being kind of all the same when you really
Mhm.
think about it. And I think it's really beautiful the way they mirror everything. This is a movie about match cuts, a movie about
Mhm.
mirroring. It's a movie about poetry and rhyming in
Mhm.
a visual sense, and I think that is handled so well. The way that frame that not circles squares. I get my shapes mixed up. I'm
That's
still
true.
learning.
We gotta get you back to
Uh,
pre-K for that
what
one.
the squares and rectangles will fade in and we'll be able to get a glimpse into different time periods. I think it's just handled really well.
Yeah.
And they also use them in interesting ways, melding them into the frame, and people's bodies will be blocking parts of different cells, and someone will walk past and it'll wipe the cell away, or we'll get like merging between time periods. And it's just filmically so interesting. And I think the editing, I think, is maybe the strongest part of this movie
Yeah,
because there's so many
it's
interesting moments.
really really something to behold. I think, and obviously a huge undertaking. before if we're talking about the technical aspects of it, I
Yeah,
think we should also talk about the de-aging that
yeah,
goes on in this
the
film,
CGI, yeah,
which is odd, which was like the when this film was announced was like, oh, and also it's going to utilize this technology, which I believe is called Metaphysic AI.
sure.
And what it does, I did a little bit of looking into this, mostly just Zemeckis himself talking about it, and how it works. It is a real-time, in-camera,
Hmm,
AI-assisted tool that de-aged Tom Hanks, Robin Wright, Paul Bettany, in real time. So we're filming
interesting.
them, they're doing their scenes, and Robert Zemeckis is back in Video Village watching it back, and he is seeing what we see. There
Hmm,
was none or very little post production done
interesting.
on those
Wow.
sequences to de-age or finish up the de-aging there,
Hmm,
which is all we've seen with de-aging technology. A lot of times in these bigger scale blockbusters, Marvel movies use it quite
mhm.
often. Dial of Destiny, for
Yeah,
example,
yeah.
which are like on the back end of those. I've heard it's effectively like digital plastic surgery. It's just
Mhm.
taking things and like pinning back, and you're
It's
using
yeah, yeah, yeah.
old reference footage. But for Metaphysic AI and the filming of here, they basically worked with the designers of this AI tool, fed in old footage of Tom Hanks and
Yeah,
Robin Wright,
which
and used
we've
that to
got plenty of.
program like 3D models of their young faces that would then in real time be filmed. So
Yeah.
that is how it works.
Mhm.
And I mean, I don't know. We don't really need to get into like should is this a good thing? It lightens the load on VFX workers, of
Yeah.
course, and there are other VFX shots that a team of people was needed to do on
Yeah,
this
of
film.
course.
But of course,
They
is this
didn't
going
use,
to
Metaphysic AI to make, like, the dinosaur or
yeah.
the wolf or whatever.
Um, but we get into the conversation of like, is that lightening the load on them, or is that an issue of that kind of artistry is going to be completely replaced by this
Mhm.
tool? I don't know. We don't need to necessarily get into that right now. What I do want to ask you, Tucker, is how effective do you think that AI de aging was as a tool in this film to de age our actors?
I'd say it was about 85% effective for
Okay.
me. I think in the way that this movie is shot, I think that there's a good pairing for that because there are only a handful of moments where the the de-aging technology is like up in your face.
Yeah.
And so because this we're not doing a lot of close-ups, we're not doing a lot of editing, I think it ends up feeling a little bit more natural because people are in the background a lot of the time. People are
Yeah.
farther away from the camera. And I think that also because it's combined with talented performances. I think the performances are very good. I didn't have any issue with it. There were a couple moments where an eye or a tooth was a little bit strained,
Yeah.
and I think the biggest problem is a mismatch of voices.
Sure.
But that's something I'm okay with, and I think still ends up working for the, immersiveness of this film because I understand the production realities of it, and I understand the thematic value of having this evolve over time and these characters, and mixed with technology age over time, and so, it worked for me. There were a couple of moments where I was a little or slightly off put, but for the majority of the time, I was just able to settle into the tone because the movie is so clever in other ways that I think it mostly is able to mask the worst aspects of that.
Yeah, yeah. I would tend to agree. I think I follow about the same at like, especially when you're close to the camera and they are like massively de-aged. I mean, towards the beginning of because the only people that really it really happens on are Tom Hanks, Robin Wright, Paul Bettany. For he's kind of like the third lead of this movie.
Yeah.
A lot of times, I think I noticed his is makeup. He's like all makeup, which is really
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah, they do use a lot of makeup.
Exactly.
There's
So
actually one thing that's very obvious makeup that I think is the worst makeup in the film, and it's the Native American guy
yes,
as he gets
when
older. I'm like,
yeah,
"Oh,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
no." He looks like it's like Bad Grandpa.
Yeah,
But
yeah, I
Bad
tend
Grandpa has much better makeup, actually.
yes.
But I
But
do have to say
anyway,
one thing. There's one element of
yep.
this film that is the most uncanny element.
Okay, what
Let's see
is
if
it?
you pick up on this. Paul Bettany's American accent.
Oh, yes, well, it's not great, is it?
No, it's not great.
Anyway, but yes, I want to talk about him in a moment, but the de-aging stuff is largely done on Hanks and Wright, and it's most noticeable when they are de-aged the most, which is when they're like 18 years
Yeah,
old.
yeah,
I think one of the big promotional images is them like hugging or
yeah.
whatever,
Mhm.
and when that scene is in motion and they're talking or whatever, you're like their mouths are moving in an uncanny way.
Yeah.
They're looking at each other. Eye movements are uncanny.
Mhm.
It's not perfect.
Yeah.
But like also you get those issues with manually done VFX
Any
shots as
version.
well. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I digress there, I guess. But yeah, a lot of times it does benefit from having people at like the back of the room
Yeah.
doing those kind of things. And as you said, the performances, we have experienced very good actors doing this stuff. And like there's a moment where Hanks is like he's de-aged and he's like chasing, I think it's his kid like
Yeah,
around the
Vanessa,
room.
yeah.
Oh yeah, and it's when she's dressed up as a ghost. It's like a Halloween
Mhm.
thing or
It's a
whatever.
great
And
moment.
he's like, oh, ghost. I was like, I mean, he's like perfectly encapsulating like 90s Hanks right
Yeah.
now, or like 80s Hanks.
Mhm.
And it is good. Like he's able to recapture that youthful energy that America fell in love with him with,
Yeah.
30, 40 years ago. So yeah, the performances are quite well done from that standpoint. Um, I will say though that I think might alienate a lot of people from this film also is and I was trying to find the right words to describe the like tone of the performances and the
Mhm.
writing. It's like it's stagey, of course. I
Oh,
mean, the
yeah.
whole film feels stagey because much like you're watching a play on a stage, you're locked into one perspective and
Mhm.
the sets are changing and the actors are coming in different costumes and
Mhm.
everything. So, more than anything, it does feel like like you're watching a stage play.
Yeah.
Um but the acting also falls into that range where like people are acting bigger, they are their emotions are more, simplified, or the dialogue is a bit more trite or hammy, maybe you might
Yeah.
say.
Yeah.
Like this is not a film that I think, especially in its performances, is going for nuance.
Mm.
But you might disagree, and I want to hear your thoughts on that. But like, I think that might be what's alienating a lot of people, is that like
Yeah.
it's not like a Oscar-y, where we are, or awards play in a modern sense. It's going for something much broader, I think.
Yeah, I think it's going for something a little more classic, like, in terms of, Hollywood, like,
Yeah, sure,
this is more
absolutely.
a, uh, like a Sunset Boulevard or like a Cary Grant kind of a grandeur to the performances that are exaggerating emotions, especially because most of the action is given in, like, farther away in the background than we're used to getting the majority of shots, especially for films that are focused on performances. You get a lot of close-ups, a lot of over
Yeah,
the shoulder, a lot of things that are focused on the specific person's face, trying to be as grounded and as into the emotions as possible. But this movie is not about that, and I think that it's something you certainly have to adapt to. It's not the
yeah.
kind of acting that I prefer. I
Mm,
wouldn't say any of these performances are some of my favorite of the year, but I do think that they tonally match with the goal of the film, which is, as I want to transition to the thematics and the narrative of this film, which
absolutely.
is a much more poetic reading of things, and I mean like grand poetic. In
Mhm.
everything is about generalities. It is about not necessarily the specific emotion that this person is experiencing in the moment, but can you relate to that? Isn't this this emotion universal? Can't this be applied over time? And so
Mhm.
I don't think it is intended to be any given moment of the performance is intended to be grounded in one character's perspective or
Mm,
a
sure.
certain sequence, because we're cutting between things. We're cutting between time periods. We're melding things together. These characters, we're seeing the craziest moments of their life over 70 years.
Yeah.
And so I think that matches really well. And I think that the film probably would have been a little bit tonally, I think it would have been a tonal juxtaposition in a negative way if we had super grounded, like realistic, nuanced performances, and then we were melding things back to the dinosaurs,
Sure.
and
Yes.
like we were seeing the over their entire lives. Like you can see like Boyhood works in that way if it's over
Mhm.
time, but it is also shot over time, and
Yes, and
it's linearly told and things. So I
yeah.
think that the drama, the heightened drama of these performances works very well in the tone that this film filmically is going for and thematically.
Yeah, I mean, people can and probably will draw comparisons between this and Boyhood, for
Yeah.
example, or Tree of Life,
Mhm.
or if you want to go like completely sci-fi, like Cloud Atlas, for example. Just these narratives that are stretched over hundreds of years, but we're intertwining, family lines, or in the case of like Cloud Atlas, like the concept of like the human civilization or whatever. Um, but yeah, I mean, to speak to what I took from it thematically, I think there is obviously something to Zemeckis wanting to reteam with his creative collaborators from
Yeah.
Forrest Gump.
His
His
muses.
his most successful, most iconic film, I would say.
Mhm.
Also, he
Yeah.
did, he did Back to the Future, but I would argue that like
Gump is
for
bigger.
yeah, I think Forrest Gump is bigger.
Yeah.
Um, and Forrest Gump, especially recently in recent years, has I mean, the younger people, I think, especially, have like turned on this as the generational war, as it were,
Mhm.
between like Gen Z and Boomers has reached a fever pitch, like politically and culturally.
Mm.
I think there is a turning on that movie, a reevaluation of it broadly. That is, it's a Boomer fantasy fulfillment.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
is Zemeckis sort of inflating the ego of his generation, being like, look at all these important things that we lived through.
Sure.
We
Yeah,
changed the
yeah, yeah.
world in this way, huh? Look, our mark is left on American history and American society and the world at large. We are so important. And when it's all funneled through, obviously, Forrest Gump's character experiencing all this,
Yeah.
being effectively not somebody with a big interior characterization and interior life necessarily,
Mhm.
someone who is projected onto by the changing of American society.
Yeah.
And people take umbrage with that fact that it's like it's more inflationary than like straight narrative characterization, anything like that.
Yeah.
I think Zemeckis, in a certain way, and maybe it's just my perspective matching with that, is like responding to that sort of reading, or that sort of what he did with Forrest Gump with this. I mean,
Hmm.
this
Oh,
is
okay.
all we are charting like hundreds of years of the American family in their living room. And
Yeah.
I think there's something to that. We are seeing the interior lives of the American people from effectively like the beginning of the 20th century through the modern era.
Mhm.
Multiple families, but largely the family that is headed up by Forrest Gump and Jenny from Forrest Gump. Okay.
Mhm.
Um, and it's like about the trials and tribulations that happened inside the home. I like that he largely avoids them experiencing those big historic moments of the 20th century.
Yeah.
Like the only one you can really point to is they watch like the Ed Sullivan show, the Beatles performance on TV, and like
Mhm.
that's it. There's no JFK assassination.
Yeah,
There's no
yeah.
fucking, I don't know, 9/11. There's no
Watergate,
moon.
yeah.
There's no moon landing.
Yeah,
Watergate.
yeah.
None of that is in this movie. It is all like the trials and tribulations that happens personally. And I find that really interesting as a like a response and inversion of the Forrest
Yeah.
Gump
Hmm.
issue. Um,
And did
and
it
of
work for
course,
you in that way?
yeah, go for it. What you
Did
say?
it work for you in that way?
Yes, I think it thematically, I find that the most fascinating prospect raised in here.
Sure.
And just how I'm trying to verbalize this a little bit, like how he's pointing to like the issues that arose with like boomer parenting,
Hmm.
like
Oh,
why
sure.
like
Yeah, yeah.
as he's advanced in his age and like has adult children and everything now, he's like, well, how did the way that my parents, or effectively like Paul Bettany being like
Yeah.
the
Mhm.
stand or his parents' generation, how did their way of life, looking back to when they first got their house and moved in after the war, how did their way of parenting affect me,
Mm.
influence me in the way that I parent? And Tom Hanks is effectively, he's an artist in this film, so kind of like a Zemeckis stand-in, I feel,
Yeah,
a little bit.
probably.
Um, Always obsessed with like the frame, the painting that he's working on, and having to abandon that like when he has a family and trying to get a more serious job and everything. Or yeah, the parentage is something that I think is really reflected on in here, and how that is passed on through generations, the trauma, the interpersonal issues, the things unsaid. Tom Hanks's character has a thing where he will just kind of push off issues. He'll keep pushing and pushing off and pushing off until he is in his old age. And Robin Wright is going to Paris because she never got to, and they never got the house that he wanted to build and all of that. There is like a lot of repression built into the characters that is passed on through generations as well.
Mhm.
But I talked for a long time, so I want to get your thoughts as well.
Let's focus on, for now, the small moments, the specific story of Ricky and Margaret and Al and Rose, this family that we watched the entire life of, and this is the biggest divulgence. Is that the right word?
Divergence.
Divergence and divulge is a different word. This is
Yes.
the biggest divergence from the graphic novel, which does not have a core family that
Okay.
we're following for the majority of it. It's much more about melding lots of different time periods and lots of different families and things. This movie, I think, strikes a really good balance where there is a core narrative. It is not clear what that core narrative will be for the first 25 minutes of the film, I would say, because it's much more about setting up all of these different storylines. But I really like that the movie does settle into a pace where once every separate smaller storyline has been set up and Paul Bettany, Alan Rose's storyline has been set up, we then are able to, for the majority of the rest of the film, settle into watching. Do we know the last name of this family? Al, Ricky, Rose,
Um.
Young, the Young family, which is funny.
Hee hee
The
hee.
Watch the Young family evolve over time from
Mhm.
the first moment that they move into this house after whatever war, I guess World War II, right?
Yeah, it's World War II.
Yeah, Al coming home from World War II to the last moment, which is Ricky and Margaret
Mhm.
sharing a moment, reflecting on their life. I like that we have this core narrative because the movie for that first 25 minutes, I think, is experimental in a positive way for me, where I'm really enjoying the intercutting and the ways it's playing with framing and editing.
Mhm.
But I was sitting there listening to like the thoughts of the old couple that were sitting next to me and
Yeah.
my dad sitting a couple seats away from me and thinking, they have no idea what's happening here. They didn't read the graphic novel. They don't know
No.
what's
Yeah.
going on. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I think the movie's really bold in that way, where it's not necessarily, especially for the beginning, supposed to be an easy thing to get into. I guess I feel lucky that I have read the graphic novel and
Mhm.
was primed to what the concept of this film was, to where I was able to be like, "Oh, okay, I know this is going to happen."
Mhm.
But I think that it's bold that it starts in that experimental way, and then it merges that experimental storytelling or the experimental editing and filmmaking with a more traditional family narrative that I think is actually really strong. And the biggest theme I take away from the like personal grounded element of the Young family is it's about hindsight. It's about being present. It's about appreciating the people around you and remembering the small moments and not letting the stress of life overtake being able to appreciate your home, your presence, your family, and being here. I think it really is about being
Yeah.
present
Living
in
in the
time,
present for
and then
sure.
also being able to look back on the things you might regret, but then understanding them in the context of the time in which they were happening. That it's
Mhm.
not as like hindsight is 2020. It's really easy to look back and think, "Oh man, I messed all these things up." But this movie, I think, is therapeutic in a way because you watch someone make a mistake and then seconds later or sometimes even in the same frame you see them regretting that mistake, but as you're watching it as a viewer, I think you get a really powerful sense of the psychology that goes into these things. You're like, yeah,
Mhm.
you regret this, but I'm also seeing you make that decision in the past, and it wasn't made in a bad way. You weren't doing this out of malice or spite or anything. Like, I just think it's a personal, a very personal and powerful like reflection on the human thought process and
Yeah.
aging and regret and presence and all these things that are so easy to think of in like high level, um, like just kind of general psychological things, but like
Yeah.
when you juxtapose them like within the same frame, I think it becomes just so easy to understand life in like this general sense of like it's all happening once. I don't know. I'm going on a tangent.
Yeah. Yeah.
I want to get into like the larger themes, but what do you think about that sort of like
No, I
very
mean,
small scale, personal, internal rating?
I think you're meant to really take it to heart and like apply it to your personal life, or at least I did, because it's a film that really reminded me of this question that I think I ask quite a bit, or many people ask quite a bit, is like you think back and you're like, yeah, like what was it like for my parents to
Yep.
live with
Mhm.
my grandparents when they were my age,
Yep.
or going flipping that back another generation or another generation? You're like, what is like passed down, or what was the experience of their youth like that transformed them into the person that they are today, and how
Mhm.
how is that the same for me and everything? These are the questions that I think here is sort of posing and displaying for you in a broader fashion
Yeah, totally.
with the young family. So yeah, ultimately it's just something that to get you thinking. It's kind of like it's I think it's good to drop this like right before the holidays too.
Sure.
Not that a lot of people are going to go see this
No.
movie, unfortunately, but I think that's ideally what Zemeckis is going for
Yeah, because it's
here.
very much a movie about family and
Yeah, yes.
about traditions and about holidays and about appreciating and understanding other people that are different from you in time period, but are in reality very similar to you. And that is to sort of balloon. I think you transitioned us very nicely into the
Mm,
larger scale thing that I think that the film is very strong on both the smaller scale, sort of internal thought processes thing that I was just referencing. But I
mm.
think why I love this film, with that included, is that it really is about how similar things are over time,
Yeah.
and I think that it's something that you might struggle to think about in because we're so entrenched in our own time period and our own politics and our own technologies. But because this film is able to, because of the cells and the editing, present things juxtaposed on screen together, I think it creates this really harmonious look back at the cyclical nature of human history and how,
Hmm.
as much as we might see things changing over time, how in reality things are really similar over time, and how every generation has the tragedies that they go through and the sicknesses and the births and the deaths and the marriages and the fights that are so important to people in the moment. Uh, but these have always happened.
Hmm.
And the ways in which people are always worried about rent, and people are always worried about
Yeah.
the economy, and people are always looking at the new technologies of the time, which I think is a really interesting this film plays with sort of in the background. And the happiness of moments and the jokes that they tell, that looking back of like in my mind it's like, did people even tell jokes in the 1700s? Like, what was going on?
Sure, sure.
we're like, that's such a long time ago. That was so stuffy and stale.
Hmm.
But the reality is that was modern times at one point, and people were excited about the new technologies and the new frontiers,
Hmm.
and the politics were the biggest things happening at that
Or
time.
to bring that back down smaller, I mean, our 1700 storyline is the son of Ben Franklin being like, I just don't get along with my dad. We
Yeah,
just think completely differently
we
about
argue
politics and
politics.
whatnot.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or like, there's parallels that Zemeckis draws, and obviously it is meant to be like, everything changes, but nothing does. History
Mhm.
repeats itself. Where the you know the a certain character dying 20 minutes ago happens both in like the 1980s and then the 2020s, with this
Yeah.
new family that moves into the house, and their house cleaner gets covid and
Mhm.
dies from covid.
Yeah.
Like that is something. And then Zemeckis is obviously drawing comparisons from between like covid and the Spanish flu in the
Mhm.
1920s. That there's a family that whom that happens to. It's the pilot father, and you assume he's going to die flying his aircraft or whatever.
Yeah.
But the guy's like, no, he died from the influenza, as he takes off his mask or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're like, yeah, I mean, that's clearly that's something that Zemeckis is going for in this film, is
Mhm.
the cyclical, mirroring, rhyming nature of history, or more
Yeah.
specifically, like American history or the American family.
Mhm.
So, yeah, I don't know if there's a whole lot else I have to say about it.
Sure.
One thing I do want to say, and I don't know if this is a hot take, but we didn't talk about him a whole lot outside of his poor American accent, I
Mhm.
guess. Paul Bettany, I think, gives maybe my favorite performance in the film,
Sure. Oh,
honestly.
I would agree with that. Yeah, he's great.
Because he's he like. It's also a little odd to me that, like, his appearance never really changes for about 30
True.
years, and then suddenly he's an old man makeup.
Yeah, yeah.
But anyway, but like his performance is still good. I think of anyone, he probably, I mean, he probably has like the most stage acting experience, so
Mm,
he gets like the tone of what's going on here a little bit more, I think. And so for that reason, I think his performance clicks a little bit more with me
sure.
than anyone else's. And he's also not hindered by looking a little bit weird when
Yeah,
he's
yeah,
younger or whatever, because they don't really use the technology on him. So
yeah.
yeah, I like Paul Bettany. I think everyone in this is good, but like he's the only one that stood out to me as like, hey, Bettany's doing something pretty special here, I think.
Yeah, yeah, and I didn't even
Um,
know he was in the movie. So he
yeah, me
walks in the
neither.
frame, I'm like, "Hey, I
Hey,
know
I know
this
that
guy."
guy.
And then for a while, at the beginning especially, I'm sort of off put by his American accent, but I think that what the character stands for in the narrative of the film of him really having these traumas and these issues and then supplanting them onto his children, I think is
Yeah.
really
Yep.
powerful. And also the ways that his aging comes with sickness, and the loss of his wife and things, I think
Hmm.
are some of the more powerful narrative moments of the film. And I do quickly want to talk about two other elements of the film,
Okay.
which is, and I'll pitch two to you, and you choose which one we
All right. So choose your
take,
own adventure.
which is the side stories, and the production design. Which one do you start with?
Well, side stories meaning like the
Anything that's
other.
not the Young family.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I liked the Inventors of the Lazy Boy. I like that storyline quite a bit.
Yeah,
I think that's the best one.
yeah. I think that was great,
Uh
uh,
huh.
because I think that storyline uh, shows happiness the most out of all of them. There
Yeah.
are I don't know if there are any like sad moments told in that storyline, but I think that the the ways that it is about ingenuity, the ways that it's about
The American dream, you
the
know,
American dream, yeah,
you go out, you invent something in keeping in line with the like the setting of here. He invents like a staple of the American living
true,
room. He
yeah,
invents the lazy boy.
yeah, yeah, and then that. I mean, I don't know if I'm like reading a little bit too far into this,
Oh,
but
sure.
um, I think that invention of the lazy boy chair then also uh, kind of feeds into the fold out couch that Al is then sleeping on when he's in the living room, that he's like
Oh, sure. Yeah.
really old and he's like had an accident or something. Um, I think that, and so there's that storyline. Just quickly, I want to mention that
Mhm.
I think that the ways that this film plays with the multiple storylines, the editing, and the production design, I think also really helped key me into a lot of the thematics
Sure.
about how as much things change, they stay the same. And I think the framing, obviously, a very big part of that, in which um, the production design is also mirrored and rhymes in certain ways of the radio that they have in the 20s and the or not the 20s in the 40s is
Uh-huh.
in the same place that the TV is as
Exactly.
people grow up.
Yes. Yes.
Different ages and eras of Christmas trees are sort of placed in the same area.
Mhm.
People have dinner in the same place in this room. The couches, the styles might change. You might think that this is outdated or garish, and but it's just a couch at the end of the day.
Looks like
And
something you have in an office.
yeah. Um, and then we see that age and then that get replaced and then that's
Mhm.
old. I think it's I don't know, it just makes me appreciate, like, I mean, it just makes me appreciate everything, which I think is
Yeah.
why I like this movie so much, is it it just pushes me to think about, like,
Mhm.
you take so many things for granted. I take, like, just a house for granted. You're like, "Oh, that's just a
Mhm.
house, like, it's been there." But the idea that that house has been there like 300 years and has seen all these families and has seen marriages and someone
Yeah.
giving birth and multiple
Yep.
people dying and, like, and you see it be built from its foundation up. I think it just gives me an appreciation for the origin of things in a way that I'm kind of like averse to sometimes. I'm very
Mm.
interested in history, but this movie I think gives me more of like a personal look into like
Yeah, it's
just the
very.
process of things.
Yeah, it's really tuned into this this thing Sonder, if you're familiar, which is the philosophical or psychological, however you want to cut it. Just this idea that like like completely stepping outside of your own perspective and like everyone that I pass on the street, every car that I drive by, every whatever has people in it that have their own lives that have existed
Yeah.
for the same time, if not longer than
Yeah.
mine has. They have their own experiences, they have their own lives, and like expanding that out to a massive scale. And that is exactly what this film is. I mean,
Yeah.
you
And you
can
get that
take you
final
can take
shot.
It
That
you
final
can take a
shot in
lot
which
away from
the
it. Personally. Yeah, yeah, I
yes,
mean, yeah, though, we break out of the corner of the room at the very end of the film and go through and spin around and look at all the houses and all the people on the street and everything like
yeah,
that. Yeah, I Zemeckis is clearly playing with that idea. He's clearly playing with a lot of those kind of ideas here. So, I'll give my score first because I think
sure,
I know what you're going to give it,
yeah,
Tucker. I'll go a 7.2 on this one. I think it's
sure,
a good movie. I
yeah.
think it's quite good.
And I will deliver the legendary 10 out of 10. I think this movie is a
Mm.
masterpiece. I think it is a incredibly personally impactful. It's something that I think I would get a lot out of an on a rewatch and knowing where the characters go, because I do think there's a lot of really, really smart screenwriting here with setups and payoffs and parallels, as we've been mentioning this entire time. I just adored this movie. I really did not expect to. I think that it's one of the most impressive production design films I've ever seen. I think that Alan
Mhm.
Silvestri's score is really, really good.
Yep,
Um,
it hit you right at the beginning. I was like, "This is good. This is good
yeah,
stuff." Yeah,
I loved it, and I really did not expect to, because I've not been a fan of Robert Zemeckis' work
recent
of
work.
most of my life.
Yeah.
That it was released since the year 2000, which is when I was born. But I really think that I think this is a return to form. I think it's remarkable. I think it's one of his best films, and it's one that I will be quite heavily championing because I think there's a lot of fascinating textual work here,
Mhm.
reflection work. I think it acts as a really great like period at the end of the sentence, sort of full circle moment for all of
Yeah,
these creatives that have been working together for so many years. Um, I just loved it.
yeah,
So thank you very much, everyone, for watching us, for joining us on this non-linear review of here. I don't know, we kind of jumped around a
yeah,
lot.
whatever.
We'll see you guys in the future for more movie reviews.